So I'm going to be going over the immune system today, which is a huge subject. And I realized as I was preparing this that really this is just going to be like one aspect of it or a few aspects of it. And first, I want to start by telling another story about my history with studying naturopathy in the immune system. So, as some of you may have heard before, um, for me, when I started out in the 90s, it was all about HIV and HIV care. And I had friends that were HIV positive, and I knew people that died even before I got to Bastyr. I was going through all of this stuff, and so to make a long story short, I got into Bastyr University to go to their naturopathic program, and while I was there, I read about this one naturopathic doctor that before she became a naturopath, she was a researcher. So she was a PhD researcher, and she was now getting NIH-funded grants to study natural medicine for HIV. And her name is Dr. Leanna Standish. And she's now become very famous for a bunch of studies that have come out. But I read an article about her, and I was really blown away by it. And I knew, like, that's where I want to be. You know, that's what I want to do. And so I was thinking about her, and then I saw in the article what she looked like, so I could recognize her. And I just happened to be walking in Volunteer Park one day, and there she was. And I was like really nervous, so I just thought, I'm just gonna walk right up to her and just talk to her. And I, introduced myself, and I told her that I really admired what she was doing. And I said, you know what, I just want to work for you. I'll work for free. I'll do anything. I'll empty the trash. I'll sweep the floors, anything. And I just laid out my story to her, and she just was very quiet. She just listened and listened. And then she said, there is a project that maybe you could help with. So she said, drop off your CV, and which I didn't have a CV, so I quickly threw something together. And I got in and was working in that department, actually got hired for pay, fortunately. And she pulled me aside to get her working on this other project. So she was doing a number of things at once. And she was getting these official studies in. She was getting these grants, very above ground kind of work, but she was also doing what she called guerrilla research, because she had a lot of patients that had AIDS. And, she was trying to find something for that. And so she would do these small pilot studies on a shoestring budget or on no budget, basically. And what she wanted to do was study a cytokine called interleukin-2, only giving that in a homeopathic dose. So what that means is taking this pharmaceutical drug, interleukin-2, which is a cytokine, which is an immune stimulant, and taking that and diluting it down through the classic method of homeopathy, which is where you put 1 drop in 100 drops of solution, and then you succuss that up, and you take 1 drop of that, and you put that in 100 drops and succuss that up. You do that 6 times, you get the 6C potency, which she had. Do it another 6 times, you have the 12C potency, she had that, and the 30C and the 200C. And interleukin-2 is this cytokine sometimes used as a drug, and it was used for HIV patients at that time because there wasn't much else to offer. And with HIV disease, the process is basically that the CD4 cells drop progressively more and more and more. And when they get below around 200, then people start getting all of these opportunistic infections. And then they have to go on all these drugs to protect them from that. And one of the goals in HIV care is to keep the CD4 cells up above that point. So um, we started giving this homeopathic dose of this drug. And I should say that the reason the drug isn't more popular, wasn't more popular, is because it's inflammatory. And people could go on it and raise their CD4 cell counts, but they would feel like they were sick. They would have fever and feel really terrible. So what would happen if you give a homeopathic dose? And what we saw is that the CD4 cell counts went up each time. And I witnessed it 5 times. It was actually with 2 different patients. One patient, it was repeated 4 times. So they basically, he would go, he would get his blood draw, then he would go on it for a month, get the blood draw done again, go off of it, you know, a month later, go on it for a month, and so on. So we had all these series of blood draws. And the CD4 cell counts went up a lot, like 20% when we got to the highest potency, the 200C. They went up 20%. And I have to say that it wasn't a well-controlled trial. It wasn't double-blinded. And it was just like early research to see if the method was possible. And it seemed like it worked. And it was a real eye-opener for me, because I was already into the classic method of homeopathy, which is something altogether different. This is more like a like modern pharmacy combined with homeopathy kind of approach. And it showed me that, yes, indeed, people can respond to medicines, even when they are extremely small or even diluted to the point beyond where anything is detectable. And I know that's a big area of controversy. Like, of all the different forms of natural medicine, homeopathy is definitely the one that has the most controversy, because of that issue of dosage. Like, how could something work when the dosage is so small? And yet it seems like people do respond. So it was a real eye-opening experience for me, and kind of shaped a lot of the direction that I went in. And because by the time I had gotten to that point, I was really interested in natural medicine, but I don't think I had any illusions about HIV care at that point. I had already seen so much, and I wanted something that really worked in a grounded kind of way. And that was showing me that, you know, more is possible than, you know, what we're normally told about dosages and that kind of thing. We have to be open-minded about that. And there are medicines available on the market that are like that, you know, homeopathic. It's not really proper homeopathic, but they call them homeopathic growth factors and various different things people get. And my conclusion at the end of it, after watching people use those and some other similar therapies, is that they can work, that they get a response from people, but it's not something that necessarily is sustained. And what I realized is we really have to get natural therapies, natural substances, in order for people to have a sustained kind of natural healing. That was my conclusion. And so basically, I, over the years, have gone away from that and things like that towards simple tinctures. And if you've worked with me, you may know that I'll try various different tinctures in minute doses. And I'll use high doses sometimes, but very often tiny doses, drop doses, 3 to 5 drops. And it's really just playing with the minimum dose that a person will respond to. That's always what I'm looking for. Okay, so this is my generic rendition of acute infections. This is not necessarily about COVID-19, although it could be. um, the, uh, the number of days would be a little bit off, but it could also be about HIV, hepatitis A, B, or C, or many, many other infections. There's this kind of standard way that they go. And so this is over the course of days. You will see the viral load. If we're talking about viruses, the viral load will climb up. And when it gets above a certain level, a person will have symptoms, and it will keep going up until the adaptive immunity kicks in. And that would be finally the response of the lymphocytes, the T cells and the B cells would be kicked into gear. And that is what would clear the infection out. And one analogy I've thought of for this, of this immune response, is like if you get locked out of your home, if you come home and you've lost your key, okay, their first line of defense would be to find some other way to get in, to go in through a window or break the door down or find some other way to get in without the key. And that is this immune response that we have to anything which invades the body. The macrophages, NK cells, natural killer cells, eosinophils, mast cells are part of it, and many, many other cells have this acute kind of reaction which can handle just about anything. Okay, that kicks in and does the best it can until the locksmith comes. Okay, that's the analogy I'm working on here. So if you don't break in through the window or break down the door and wait long enough, eventually you can get a key. And what the lymphocytes do is they figure out the exact pattern of that infection, so that if cells infected by a certain virus will display that virus on their surface, or if the viral particles floating in the blood can be seen by the immune system, it can produce antibodies or things that can recognize that cell on their different cells, and it can tag them. And it's a very efficient way then for the immune system to work. Once that adaptive immunity kicks in, it will generally clear things out. And that's what happens with most infections. So there'll be this initial phase where things get really inflamed, and then they will, and then the adaptive immunity kicks in and it clears things out. So I want to talk about how that goes with the hepatitis viruses A, B, and C. So with hepatitis A, the immune system, there's this acute inflammatory response, and a person gets inflammation in their liver, and then the lymphocytes finally adapt and they clear it out. So a person has this temporary infection and they get over it. Okay. So with hepatitis A, that happens. And with hepatitis B, that will happen too. There's the infection, the viral load goes up and up and up, and then it will come down. But some of the times with hepatitis B, the infection will continue. It will come down. There'll be this acute infection, and then it will come down, but it won't entirely clear. Sometimes with hepatitis B, I meant to look up the statistics, but I think it's about 10 or 20% of the time, the infection continues, and it slowly starts going up again because the adaptive immunity isn't, smart enough, or it's not able to identify that pathogen and clear it out. And then with hepatitis C, that happens more often. So hepatitis C, there's the acute infection initially, and then that is cleared up, and then it, comes back many years later, is that the viral load gradually goes up. And then with HIV, it's the same kind of thing. There is with HIV an initial acute infection, and people will get sick most of the time within the first month that they get infected. They'll get this acute infection, which can seem like the flu, and then the body adapts and starts suppressing it, and the viral load goes down, but never entirely, not enough, and gradually it starts going up and up and up, and that can take many years. But with HIV, that almost always happens. And there's been some talk about this, wondering if some people infected with COVID-19 or with the virus that causes that, some people might go on to become chronic carriers of it. But as far as I can tell so far, that is not happening. And the other thing I'm showing on this graph too is that there is this asymptomatic carrier stage, which is, of course, the big issue with COVID-19, that people are asymptomatically carrying it and spreading it and spreading it. And then they reach a certain viral load and they'll start manifesting symptoms. They'll start feeling sick. And if the body is able to suppress it with the innate immune response, they can have a very mild reaction. But if their body is not able to suppress it, the viral load goes very high and the symptoms become very intense. And as we know, it does lead to some people getting acute respiratory distress syndrome or other diseases and dying. So that's what I was going to say about that one. Let me know if you have any questions at this point. And I will move on.
Yes. I have a question.
I have a question.
Sure.
When I see the
Yes.
lymphocyte, is that related to the lymph system?
Well, they travel through the lymph system and the bloodstream. But they're not exclusively there. The lymphocytes, they will travel into the lymph system, but they're also in the regular bloodstream. Yeah.
My question is kind of based on the super spreaders or the asymptomatic people and in your graph.
Yeah.
And I realize it's just one graph, but is it possible that people can stay for an extended period of time and not be asymptomatic? Like super spreaders could have it for months, whereas the regular course of the disease might only be 30 days, but some people could be actively have it for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Is that,
yeah. I don't know anything more than that, but yeah, I've heard there's this theory that there could be that. Just like there is this theory that there could be people that recover but yet don't fully recover and they keep carrying it on forever and then they could be spreading it. I've heard that too. I don't know that any of this is confirmed yet.
Okay, and then also just in the initial level, when you become asymptomatic, when you become symptomatic, the lymphocytes are still, they're trying to figure out the code, right? They're still active in that innate immune response. They just haven't figured out the combination yet.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. And how long that takes, I guess, is somewhat of a roll of the dice because there's this random generation of these detectors, like those keys, like your body is randomly generating keys, looking for the key that will fit that lock. And but I mean, of course, it's got to be more than just a random process. To me, I mean, it's speaks to how good your immune system is working at that point, and how much your cytokines are functioning properly. Like interleukin-2, one of the things about that particular cytokine is that it speeds up that process of the adaptive immunity. It increases the number of certain T cells, and it improves the maturation of the T cells in the thymus gland. So so there's a lot to it, but there is something of a randomness about how quickly your body will figure those out. And And, you know, of course, we're all waiting for other people to figure it out through a vaccine, right? A vaccine is, in a sense, an artificial adaptive immunity. A vaccine is when they'll give us those antibodies, or they'll give us something that will trigger those antibodies. There is such a thing as a passive vaccine, which is where they'll literally give you antibodies. They'll just pump them in your bloodstream, and you know, and it can work that way. Of course, we're far from having it in this case, but you know, we do have that for some infectious agents. So let me move on to this next one. I was just basically showing, yeah, cytokines. So the term cytokine basically means cell mover, like kine from kinetic, you know, to have movement. Cyto means cell. So there are these chemical messengers that certain cells of your immune system and your endothelial cells, as we see right here, they produce these chemical messengers that basically tell the immune system to work. You know, they say, get it in gear. And I think maybe we all early on in this heard something about that cytokine storm happening, where people's cytokine response was too strong, and they were, you know, they were having a more severe course because of that. And there's some talk about, well, what to do about that. Can we modulate? Can we change the cytokine response? And I just found this article yesterday titled, "Should We Stimulate or Suppress Immune Responses in COVID-19? Cytokine and Anti-Cytokine Interventions." So they have not only drugs that are cytokines themselves, like interleukin-2 and all these other ones now, they also have cytokine blockers. And so what they're saying in this article is therapies, when applicable, should be administered with the right timing, i.e. antivirals and immune boosters should be initiated promptly after symptom onset, whereas immunosuppressants should be administered at the very start of the cytokine storm. So they're talking about like a two-phased response to COVID-19. And what the article is explaining, as has been said in many other places as well, is that initially with COVID-19, there seems to be an immune suppression phase. The cytokines aren't kicking in enough. And I've read that that's one of the theories why children tend not to have a lot of severity, a big severity of illness with this disease, because children have a strong cytokine response. And I hear this all the time from parents about, you know, children with their fevers. You know, I mean, they're running around, they're just fine, and then all of a sudden they're sick in bed with 102, 3, 4 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, they really have a robust, quick cytokine response, and then that kicks in, that clears. That's one theory why that population may not be succumbing as severely to this illness. So when I read about this, and I've been thinking, like, is there a herbal or nutritional way to sort of match this? And I just want to say right now that I don't know, but I'm looking for that. I don't know that herbs fall into categories like immune boosters, like they're saying here, like use immune boosters in the beginning of the illness, and immunosuppressants, use those later. There are some herbs that kind of have some of those qualities, you know, like echinacea is often described as an immune booster, and echinacea has been very controversial at this time. Like, we have no studies to show, you know, whether it would work or not in these cases, but echinacea does have a stimulating quality to it. And I tend to use echinacea for that reason at the very beginning of a cold or flu, like the first day, and not beyond the first day, like kind of wake things up a little bit. And last time I gave one of these talks, I talked about those warming stimulants like ginger and cayenne, and these ones that warm the center. You know, that's an age-old strategy for immune stimulation, literally referred to as stimulants. That's the old term for them. You know, we think of stimulants like it means coffee, but no, it just means it wakes up your system. And yarrow is this cooling stimulant, but it's still a stimulant kind of effect. So I don't have a strategy really worked out that's based on this, but I just wanted to put it out there, and I'm definitely thinking about this, and I'm working on this. And okay, I wanted to show this graph from this same article, and I'll try to unpack it. It's a little maybe hard to look at, but they're going over the mild or moderate disease pattern of viral load and cytokine response versus this severe pattern. Okay, so this dark red here is the viral load. So here in a mild case, the viral load shoots up, and then there's this cytokine type 1 interferon response. It's one of these inflammatory cytokines that basically facilitates your body killing off viruses. And when that response is big, that kicks in, then the viral load drops off, and then you see the lymphocytes kick in here robustly. So they have a strong cytokine response, and their lymphocytes are coming in strong, and their viral load goes down. But then in severe disease, the viral load shoots up, but that cytokine response is small. It's not big enough. And so then there's a following inflammatory cytokine response. So what they're showing here is that early on interventions they propose could be antivirals and then various different cytokines that could be used. And then in this stage, cytokine blockers, anti-interleukin 1, anti-interleukin 6. Interleukin 6 is this one that's been sort of touted as the hallmark of problems with COVID-19. I see a lot about that one. But interleukin 6, oh, it's good for you, right? It boosts immunity. But in the right quantity, you know, too much is problematic. So this is just some stuff that that I've been thinking about and exploring. And I think if nothing else, what maybe it can tell us is that when you get an acute infection, there are these different phases. And this is something that I talked about last time with, or maybe it was the time before with my teacher, Matthew Wood, getting COVID-19 and learning, like, had to change at some point during it. And he wrote about other people that got sick and they realized halfway through that something was different now and they had to change. And that's just part of this process of learning to ride it out, read your body, see these different phases happening while you're sick. So any questions about this slide and anything so far?
Well, I hear that you, and I understand that you don't know what kind of herbal treatments could step in here, but what about adaptogens?
Oh yeah. Well, I have some later on here, and I'll just say I think of adaptogens as the herbs to build up the body to prevent it. But I do know that like this famous herbalist Stephen Buhner is writing about using some of the adaptogens like rhodiola during it. And I think it's interesting. I don't think of rhodiola as classically an herb for infections. And I'm a little bit classical sometimes in my use of herbs, but I think it's interesting. I think it is possible that those could be helpful. And maybe others too, but I'll get to some of the controversy about that, the age-old controversy. So next, let me talk about the lymphatic system. I'm basically going to go over some lymphatic herbs and some immune herbs. So I want to talk about what the lymphatic system is exactly. So I think we all know something about the arteries and the veins, the general circulatory system. So you've got the artery delivering blood here, and then that goes into the capillaries where the oxygen is exchanged and nutrients are delivered and all this stuff, and that blood then drains back over to the veins and is cleared out. But some of the fluid in that blood spills over. And that part of the blood I want to talk about a little bit. So I've got this test tube of blood here. And when you run the test tube in a centrifuge where the gravity then pulls downward, the heavy things go to the bottom, right? In a centrifuge, you spin it around. And down at the bottom, the heaviest part is those red blood cells. They're packed into the bottom here. And then the white blood cells aren't quite as heavy, so you get this thin layer of white blood cells, the leukocytes, which includes the lymphocytes. So all those cells we were talking about earlier, the macrophages, NK cells, T cells, B cells, those are white blood cells, and they'll form a white coat called the buffy coat on the blood. And then there's all this fluid, the plasma here, okay? That is what can spill out into the tissue space. And that will happen more when there's an infection happening in an area, because your body will release histamine in order to open up the pores that are in the capillaries so that the white blood cells can squeeze out more easily. The white blood cells will move out of circulation into the extracellular space. They'll be in the tissue space. And they'll hang out there, and they may munch down on some virally infected cells or try to kill off some cells, kill off some bacteria. And then that must get cleaned up and soaked up through these lymphatic vessels. So that will start pouring into the lymphatic system. And there's all these lymph channels in the body, and there's these nodes periodically where there's extra immunologic work being done, there's filtering of the fluid, and there's activity of the immune cells, and that does all this work and yet keeps it moving, and it all eventually drains back into the venous system, right up in your thoracic area, and like in your chest. And that pours back in. And when you have an infection, there's a challenge on this system. Like, you've got to keep the circulation going, and it has to keep moving. And one person on the call last time brought up how movement will passively move it. So just moving your arms around, moving your legs around. Movement is the best way to keep the lymphatic system moving. But there is also tiny little muscles that move the lymphatic system. And this was actually only discovered like, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago. There are actual special lymph muscles, little pumps inside the vessels, tiny muscles that squeeze and pump and keep that fluid going. And so this is an important part of the process of fighting off an infection. And so that brings us to the lymphagogues, which is an old term for lymphatic remedies. And this is just some of them. There are many, many others, but I just wanted to go over some of these. Like I went over red root last time, Ceanothus americana, the classic one. And this is for lymph congestion felt in the throat, abdomen, or prostate gland or prostate area. And so it can be the pelvis, the upper abdomen tends to be, they say it's the spleen, but I think what it really means is the upper abdomen feeling full, and or the throat, fullness in the throat. And it could be absolute swollen glands. Like it is used for swollen glands, but before you would even get a gland that you could feel, that you could palpate this lump, before that happens, you may feel a general fullness and swelling in that area. And I should just say too that when you feel a lump on your body, you feel a swollen gland perhaps, it is something generally that you need to get checked out by a doctor. And there are some rules about when they're problematic and when they're not problematic. But there's no harm in immediately taking lymphagogues to see if they'll clear out. I mean, that's, you know, I check people's glands, and, you know, sometimes I have to send people to get, you know, further testing, blood testing or other kinds of testing, you know, to check them. But I'll immediately start a lymphagogue. And if it just goes right away, I mean, no problem. Anything that's immediately cleared up with a lymphatic remedy, I would not be concerned about. So that's red root. And oh, I have, I didn't send you folks yet. I have a sheet that goes over this in more details. Another Google Doc, which I'll show the dosage, and I spell out the safety information a little bit more completely on there. So I list the safety as safety class 1A, and that's the abbreviation for the highest safety class for herbs, according to the Botanical Safety Handbook, which is, in my opinion, the definitive source on herbal safety issues. Because, you know, a lot of sources will like list out all these side effects from herbs, but the total number of side effects is not really how you judge the safety of an herb. You judge by how often people have had a problem of it and what the evidence of problems is. And that's something that it really takes experts to be able to do. And fortunately, there are people who've made it their life's work in a very scientific way to look at the safety of medicinal herbs. And that work has been going on for a very long time. So red root, for me, this is, well, it's an herb that's worked very well for me. When I've had like a lump in my throat, I'll use red root. And I also talked about OSHA last time, kind of a less of a lymphatic remedy, but also one that can help with those upper lymph glands in the throat. But red root, popularly used as a sore throat remedy, which I would say it's great for, but in particular when it's sore because of lymph stasis in that area. I think it's very, very particular to that. And then I'll talk about Cleavers. This is an herb you can find abundantly in Golden Gate Park. It's not cultivated there. It's kind of in the wild, off the trail areas. I see it a lot, and you may recognize it just by these leaves, but the real way to positively identify it is by its feel. If you grab it kind of low down or lightly grab it and pull, it will cling onto you. It has these little spikes that, like when you walk by it, it just kind of grabs your clothing. It's not a thorny bush, but the little spikes like grab a hold of you. And this is a great lymphatic remedy for any of the glands in the body. It's most famous for when you have glands that are getting harder or nodular, little rough areas inside the lymph nodes. If they feel really, really stuck, it's especially good in that way. But also for when you would just feel a sense of fullness in some part of your body. I would include this in the strategy on that. And then let's talk about calendula. So a type of marigold, it's a pot marigold, and it's especially known for old infections, like lingering infections, but you could definitely use it acutely as well. I think it is an herb that should be in every household, if nothing else, as a wound remedy. It is just wonderful. You can put drops of the tincture right on a scrape, and it is something that I have seen several people just become completely convinced of herbal medicine over this one herb. It will absolutely heal that area very, very quickly. It's wonderful. And there's regular tincture is good. There's succus, which when you see the word succus on an herbal extract, that just means it's the juice of an herb. So they have like succus in alcohol, so it's like a tincture of the succus. That's a great one for wounds. So you apply it topically, and then you'll see it also in a lot of hand lotions, calendula hand lotion for irritated skin and so forth, and that's fine. That's a very mild form of it. I kind of more like the pure extracts of it, but a wonderful, wonderful herb. And then also I should talk about it as an antidepressant. That's something that I learned about from the herbalist Matthew Wood for seasonal affective disorder and for a certain kind of gloom. This comes from astrological herbalism, which is a very old aspect of herbal medicine. Some of the most famous herbalists from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, like Culpeper, was an astrologer, and so everything, all the herbs got sort of categorized by planets and signs. And so this is a solar herb. So it's basically helping you to tap into the solar element, like sunshine, and hence why it would be helpful for seasonal affective disorder. And St. John's wort is in that same class. There are these certain ones that kind of bring a kind of light into a person's life, or they're known to do that. And I would say definitely worth a try for mood. And in that kind of a case, I would use a tiny doses to try to, affect you on that energetic level. And again, I'll have the dosage information on the dosage in that handout, which I will post in the end, and I'll also post in the description in YouTube when I post this there. So any questions about these? Okay, so a couple of different immune herbs, and I'll start with astragalus up there in the upper left. And so this is an adaptogen, and the two up on top here are classified as adaptogens, and I should explain what that means. So the term adaptogen is applied to certain herbs, that it's a description that was created back in the 1960s by certain scientists that were doing research. It was, as I understand, mostly animal research, seeing what would make a poor lab rat or some animal survive some ordeal longer, basically. Swimming is the one that I read about. It's horrible. but that's how the research was done, to see if they would adapt to stress more effectively. And then eventually it was brought to humans, and certain herbs were seen to help people in these non-specific ways. So it's not a stimulant, not a sedative. It seems to affect different people in different ways, but helps in general for people to adapt to stress. So it's defined by these three characteristics. So an adaptogen is an herb that is non-toxic at normal doses. Okay, so if it's got some toxicity to it, it won't be classified this way. It provides non-specific resistance to stress. So it helps an animal, such as a human, adapt to a stressful situation in non-specific ways. Okay, so it's not a, raising cortisol or lowering cortisol. It's non-specific, and then it's has a normalizing influence. So if a person's blood pressure is high, it brings it down. If it's not high enough, it brings it up. Same with the cortisol levels. They'll go down when they're too high or up when they're too low. So it's normalizing effect. And there are some great books that are written on this class of herbs. They tend to be very easy to work with. You don't have to know much about herbal medicine to get some benefit from them. And some are very general in their effect, and then some have a particular type of effect, like astragalus is an immune tonic, an adaptogenic immune tonic. And it's, in my opinion, used to prevent illness. So it builds up your immune system, and traditionally it was not to be used during an acute illness. And that comes from traditional Chinese medicine, and there's a certain way that it seemed to like build up this barrier around you. So it's like building up your immune system like a shield around you. But in the ancient texts of traditional Chinese medicine, it was seen that once the infection was in you, you don't want to build up that shield because it will hold it inside you. And I don't know if that analogy totally works for me, but the way I think of it is that it's like a tonic is like weightlifting. If you lift weights, you become stronger. But if you need to, move furniture, or, you're moving out of your home on one day and you need to move that day, you don't want to lift weights that morning, right? That's not going to help you. It's something that builds up in advance of something. So that's how I would use astragalus. There's a lot of research on astragalus in its interaction with other medications, and it's sometimes helpful with other medications. There are certain chemotherapies where it actually makes the chemotherapy more effective, but then there are others where it makes the chemotherapy less effective. So it's a powerful herb that can affect the immune system, and a lot of cancer chemotherapies are focused in on the immune system. So you can change your immune system, for that. And then a lot of times, a lot of the research is on using astragalus for recovery after chemotherapy or after a big insult to your system. So astragalus is what a lot of herbalists use once the infection is clearing out. You need that final rebuilding and re-strengthening afterwards. So that's about what I can think of for astragalus. I like to use it a lot. I prescribe it a lot. Usually in small doses as tincture, but I do think that the boiling up these chips of it, like you see here, does make a stronger effect. And I'll also have people take it as pills a lot of times. If I know I want them to take it for quite a while, I'll just have them take pills because that's going to be easier to work with. And then let's talk about Eleuthero, sometimes called Siberian ginseng, although apparently that is a misnomer. And it's the highest safety rating. And it's thought of more as an adrenal tonic. So your adrenals are this gland that sit on top of your kidneys, and they're your main stress adaptation hormone gland in your body. So when your body is under a lot of stress, it'll release more stress hormones like cortisol. And cortisol is an anti-inflammatory that kind of gives you a little boost of energy and calms you down while lowering inflammation in the body. And sometimes that cortisol response gets depleted after a long, prolonged period of stress. People will have less ability to release cortisol. And Eleuthero is something that can help bring that back, help build up that system. And talking about cortisol too, I wanted to go back to that article I was showing earlier about cytokine and anti-cytokine therapies that are used. So one of the things they go over is those therapies to reduce that cytokine storm. And prednisone, which is like artificial cortisol, is one of the therapies that they go over. And that hasn't worked out too well in the trials with people with COVID-19. Like they do give people with COVID-19 prednisone, and it seems to be too much. Like it prolongs the infection and it's not good for them. But they make the point, there's a lot of evidence that it used in the right way, it could be really helpful. And my thought is, well, if a person had good adrenal function going into it, that's probably going to help a lot. Like they're going to have, their body's going to know just how much cortisol to use and, keep that cytokine storm just balanced out, I think. So that's one of the things that I thought of why this might be a good herb in prevention of a severe COVID-19. And then the final thing I'll say about it too is that one of the signs a lot of people use in choosing Eleutherococcus is a person has dark circles under their eyes. It's that sign like you've not been getting enough sleep. You get this blood stasis in these blood vessels that are right underneath your eyes. And this is an herb that just tends to work well when people have that. So that's Eleuthero.
Do you recommend that in a tincture or?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I recommend starting it as a tincture or some liquid form that you can drink. Even more so than with astragalus, because Eleuthero, I should say, is something that a lot of people are really, really sensitive to. And whenever you can get a response from an herb in a minute dose, that's the way to go with it. You'll get a deeper, more profound healing response when you respond at a small dose, but not everybody will. And some people really need some restoration, and the drop doses of tincture just are not going to cut it. And so I'll have them use capsules, and like Now Foods makes good capsules on that, or other quality brand, and take a few of those a day. That's a common one. Watch out for being overstimulated by it. Like it's supposed to help with sleep. Like take it right before bed. It's supposed to help with sleep. But I've seen many people where it is just the opposite. So, watch your own body's response on that. Like with all of these, don't believe the experts and don't believe what's written in the books. You can sense this stuff. This is how people discovered these medicines in the first place. So yeah, tincture, tea, or pill, I would start with tincture. And then let's talk about mushrooms. And maitake mushroom, when I was first in practice, I was prescribing a lot of maitake expensive products. You know, these D fraction ones, these like, you know, $60 a month products. And then gradually I started realizing that just eating mushrooms is the best way to do it. I hardly ever have people take it this way now. As long as you cook the mushrooms, even just cook it a little bit, even just light steaming will transform it enough. And you can get so much more so easily than what you can get in pills. I mean, we don't yet know exactly what it is in these mushrooms that does it. There's these beta glucans, you know, these certain kinds of carbohydrates which get a lot of study and they have immune properties, but there seems to be other things. And I have this picture of just some regular culinary mushrooms. You know, I don't exactly know, those are button mushrooms or crimini mushrooms or something like that. Those have them as well. They have the immune modulating components, very high levels of there in just the regular mushrooms. And I know that I've had some questions about, can this be used with autoimmunity? And I've looked and looked, and I don't really see a clear answer. So if somebody has Hashimoto's or some other kind of autoimmune disease where you know, the immune system is attacking one's own tissues, can it be used there? And my suspicion is that it's fine. Reishi mushrooms are, there's a clinical trial where it was good using reishi mushrooms, which are immune building and so forth. But I haven't seen much on that, nor with the other immune tonics, except astragalus. There's some research on treating autoimmune disease with astragalus, not Hashimoto's, but other. I think it was autoimmune diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis. But I have to look that up. But there's some. There is some use of astragalus with autoimmune disease, but there has been concerns raised about it, and there has been concern raised about maitake. And so, you know, I would say if you feel like it, test it out and listen to your body. But if you're afraid of it, you know, don't use it. I mean, fear is definitely the thing that stops the senses on this. You know, it's one thing I see a lot is people have been really conditioned to fear herbal medicine a lot. And then, you know, not really trusting their own senses and not really turning to the herbs. And what I'm recommending is that you embrace herbs as medicine, as humankind always did throughout history until the early 20th century. Always herbs were the primary medicine. And I've actually enjoyed exploring some of the oldest ones. I found a book by an Egyptologist going over herbal medicine, the ancient Egyptian and Assyrian texts, which are copies of older texts. And you know, it's interesting to wonder, you know, where they really come from. So then I've got chaga here, and this is like the most popular mushroom right now. I talked last week about people sort of falling in love with certain herbs and becoming enamored with it, and there's a lot of people that are enamored with chaga, and I have to say I'm sort of becoming one of them. I'm drinking chaga tea right now. It is a very nice flavor, and it's was a tea used in Russia, and a lot of people are reporting that it's anti-cancer, and I haven't seen any real clear evidence of that. But when there's been other mushrooms like turkey tail that we know have shown to have some anti-cancer ability, why not this one? But there's no clinical trials. I have not been able to find any clinical research, which is what we really would need to tell us, does it work or not work? But I think it's worth it. I think that, something with such a long history of use and some laboratory research showing that it could be helpful. And then just the flavor. I mean, you boil up this mushroom, and it comes in these like dry clumps. I mean, when you properly prepare, the product is dried, and you boil that for as long as you can. I like to get it more than an hour. And it's black like coffee with a mild, rich flavor. It is quite good. And then they mix it with chocolate and coffee and there's all these products, but I like it just by itself.
Tim, can I say
Yes.
something? This is Bridget.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had to cut out there for a minute, but then I came back to the chaga thing, and I don't know if people live in where people live who are on this call, but actually at the Stonestown Farmers Market, there's like a chaga guy, and he's like wearing kind of this weird jumpsuit. But anyways, he sells the chaga. So I would have never in a million years bought it because it's just not my thing. But my friend bought me, and it's in like this little test tube. So then I started taking it, and it's like you just put one. And so when you were just saying turkey tail, it says chaga, turkey tail, and reishi mushrooms. And you just put one capsule, and then I was putting my chai every morning, and I was loving it. And actually, when I was taking it, I was like, woo! I felt so good and strong. Shortly thereafter is when I got super sick down in Mexico. And that's when I did have the COVID, but I wasn't taking it at that time. So anyways, if anybody wants to get it, it's a super easy way. And I've just found that I really like the product. Like I went back and I bought a bunch more, and it's not that expensive. I think it's like 3 test tubes for like $20, and it lasts, like a month, each little test tube thing.
Wow.
Just FYI. And
good to know.
The product, and they have the chaga chocolate there as well.
Yeah, I've never tasted any of these kinds of products. I keep seeing them like chaga coffee, and I just feel like, I mean, I love coffee. I don't actually have it regularly, but when I want coffee, I want coffee. I wouldn't want to have something else in it. And that's sort of how I feel about chocolate too. But I guess the products must be good, because I can see how it has a flavor that could blend well with things like that.
Yeah, I really have enjoyed that product. And I didn't know anything about the chaga actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should just say again too how lots of people use all of the medicines on this page during acute illness, but I don't. I never have people take these things in the acute phase of an illness, just because of these old stories about it. Like there are certain herbs that are used for acute, and there are certain herbs that are used for strengthening and for chronic states, basically. And so I tend to kind of separate them out like that. And the herbs I talked about last time are more of my acute ones, and the lymph remedies too would be acute. So any other questions about anything? No. Okay. Well, so that's the slides I have prepared for tonight. And I do want to do this again. I had mentioned last time I could do one on the nervous system, and I think I should also do one on the digestive system. That really ties in a lot to the immune system. So I almost built that one into this, but it really gets way too complicated at that point. That gets us into some deep water, like leaky gut. And some of you may have been learning about leaky gut, and I have sort of my own take on that. I'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. And I can do other subjects as well. I could go through the other systems of the body. So anything else? Any final questions?
Tim?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
I have a quick question. Thank you so much, by the way. This is awesome. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for coming.
I wonder, since we're talking about this list of herbs, is ashwagandha somewhat related to this, or have you looked at it at all?
Yeah. Ashwagandha is another adaptogen. So it's got these kind of general effects, and I don't always know how to differentiate like Eleuthero from ashwagandha from some of these other ones, but ashwagandha, I think, is like if somebody has they're too stimulated by Eleuthero, like again, it's not supposed to be stimulating, but some people have that reaction, then I try ashwagandha. But that's about as specific as I can get with it. These are, to me, this type of herb, these adaptogens are very general use kind of utility strengtheners. And so you try and see what works for you. And ashwagandha is available in many different forms. I use it a lot as tincture. And I know Matthew Wood says that it's very particular for strengthening the ankles. Like if people have a fatigue and they're spraining their ankle more, he clues in on that. But Matthew Wood is very into like specific indications, like the little hidden clues with them, which I like that as well. But that's, yeah, there's not much else I could say about ashwagandha other than it is this kind of general immune and adrenal tonic.
Would you take it, could you take it with Eleuthero, or one or the other, or you take one in the morning, you take one in the afternoon? Like, how would you recommend? I take ashwagandha now and I'm really liking it.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about Eleuthero. I've got those dark circles and I've got, like, sign me up. But yeah,
I think of the Eleuthero as more specific to the dark circles.
So would you take that instead of the ashwagandha, or you take it the same day?
And that would depend. It's that would depend. Yeah, there's no rules on that. Yeah.
I have another question about what you taught us last week. I went out and bought all those herbs and was just
great
in love with the nettle and in love with
wow.
It just tasted so good, like smoky and herby, and just really like, I just feel joy when I put these things on my tongue for the first time, and I can tell my loves them. Yeah, it's wonderful. But like, how long, like, okay, so now I have a whole bunch of herbs. Am I just putting it, and I do tune in and realize I want some lung support now, or I want to help my circulation, and I'll put it in my tea or my water or on my tongue. But like, do you wait a few minutes if you're going to do, tincture sampling or?
Okay, so you're talking about when you start mixing different herbs together. I actually have taught a class on this before, and I got me to like think more deeply about it. So I've been really trained in this tradition of simpling, which is where you treat each herb as a formula in of itself, and you look for the specific indications for that herb, and you use that herb taken by itself apart from the other herbs. You may be using several herbs, but when you're trying to get the full medicine, the full effect from an herb, you take it individually, okay? But you don't have to. That's one tradition. You can just mix them all together. But if I see an herb that's very well suited for a person, very particular to them, I like them to take it apart from the other herbs, at least in the beginning, and then I'll start mixing them together. And then you really can just mix them all in the same bottle. And there's some there's some rules people follow about balancing a formula and making it just right and so forth. But you can also just do it intuitively. There's no harm. There's no harm in that. There's no like bad combination of herbs, but there's plenty of rules out there. There's plenty of rule books. But I encourage you to just keep experimenting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Do you have any comments for people on, I think you comment a week or two ago where like your body or sometimes your system will just like start forgetting to take an herb. Maybe that's a signal that you had it for a couple weeks and you know, you're just, any kind of comments on, you know, some people, on how long to take something, like there's different things I've read, like 6 days off or take it X weeks, but be sure to take a week off. And I was just wondering if you want to comment on any.
I don't know if I can come up with any specific rule on that. I mean, astragalus and Eleuthero and maitake, the ones on this page are generally thought of as long-term use herbs, like many months, maybe year after year, you know, not necessarily sticking to just that one, but to the use of tonics, to the use of something that's going to rebuild and strengthen you, if that seems appropriate. But they don't have to be used that way. And I guess if I were to give any guidance or pointers about it, the thing I would encourage is to keep using herbs every day. Bring them into your life every day. And yes, the formulas and the combinations and the individual herbs will change over time, but it's easy to get out of the habit of using them all together. Like a lot of people get out of the habit of, you know, drinking water or eating vegetables or something like that. These are habits, you know. They're sometimes hard to remember, and sometimes you need a really good, clear reason to do it, like someone prescribing it for you. You know, people will take herbs more regularly when they're prescribed them. And so when you're prescribing for yourself, that sometimes is a challenge. Like, how do I keep myself doing this, you know, because you question your own judgment or something. But I would say, you know, make it a part of your life and maybe vary what you're working with and try out different things at different times, but keep it going. So I hope that helps. Okay. Any other questions? I'll be going on a webinar with Matthew Wood here pretty soon. He does his monthly COVID-19 meeting with herbalists. So, before we end, like any other questions? Is that it? Okay. Well,
hello.
Yes.
I wrote a question on chat.
Oh.
You mentioned, yes. and I lost it. I can't find my notes. What sites do you go to get excellent herbs and tinctures, etc.? I've checked, and there's some really flaky sites, but I don't know. Thank you.
Mountain Rose Herbs is a great one. The local one, the store Gathering Time, THYME, in San Rafael, and they'll ship anywhere in the U.S. and they're working through the COVID thing, and so I really recommend using them first.